Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. Welcome to episode 249 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about some principles to keep in mind when we're having difficult conversations. Now, the reason I'm talking about principles and not a perfect process is because there's no perfect process and you're always going to feel a little bit awkward about having a challenging conversation. So with that in mind, let's get into the episode right now. So when I deliver training to help people with challenging conversations, I notice something interesting. It seems that many people are looking for the perfect thing to say, the perfect opening to the conversation, for example, that opening line that won't upset anyone or have them bursting into a fit of rage. Or maybe they want the perfect process, the ultimate challenging conversation model that will unlock everything and solve all our problems. Now, unfortunately, a perfect model or phrase for challenging conversations does not exist. There are lots of good ones out there, but they don't provide the perfect solution because you'll still feel uncomfortable and the other person may still get upset even if you execute the conversation perfectly. So instead of looking for perfection, I think we should be focusing on principles instead. Now in this episode, I'm going to outline the important principles that I believe are helpful for successfully undertaking a useful, challenging conversation. But before we get started, there are very good resources out there to help you with a framework or two, and some options I like to recommend are Crucial Conversations. They have a course or a book as well. Difficult Conversations, which you can also find on the show notes page. I'll put a link to all these in the show notes page, thoughtfulleader.com/249. And I've also got a short ebook on this of my own, which I'll put a link to in the show notes page as well. So there are good frameworks out there. I'm not trying to say there aren't, but sometimes I think it's simpler to just keep in mind a few simple principles so that we can execute a conversation using the principles rather than trying to get wrapped up in following a perfect process. Now, earlier I mentioned that we want to have a useful, challenging conversation. So what does this mean? Well, in my opinion, a useful, challenging conversation results in heightened awareness. So the other person is aware that there's an issue or a challenge that needs to be overcome, and they also know that you are aware of it too. The second thing that highlights a useful conversation is greater understanding. Both sides have had the opportunity to raise their grievances or put across their point of view, and both parties understand the other side more than they did before. The third aspect that characterizes a useful conversation is an expectation has been set. By having the conversation, both parties are aware that the current situation or issue can't continue as it is. And lastly, a useful, challenging conversation usually results in a plan being put in place. So there's some sort of actions or steps in place to make progress on the issue, and this includes a follow-up to check in on progress. Now, this doesn't mean that the problem is perfectly resolved. There may still be differences of opinion that are hard to address, but the issues are out in the open between you and the other person at least, and a path forward is being forged. Now, the reason I like the idea of principles for a challenging conversation is that they can be quite simple. So rather than trying to memorize your opening line or exactly what you'll do if a certain event happens, or to stick to a precise process, I find it better to focus on broader principles. So if we have, say, 3 or 4 simple principles that we keep in mind during a challenging conversation, we're easily able to remember them, and we can more easily keep them at the front of our mind even in the thick of a challenging conversation. And as Mike Tyson famously said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And the plan in this case is the perfect process or opening line or that sentence you'll say to get your point across in just the right way. And getting punched in the face in this context is that flood of emotions, the anxiety and potential emotional outbursts that derails our finely laid plans. And there's a related article I'd recommend you check out. I'll put it on the show notes page. And it's all about avoiding a difficult conversation. Ask yourself these 3 questions. Okay, so let's take a look at some simple principles that hopefully you can keep in mind when you're in the thick of a challenging conversation And number one is, you've got to realize it's not all about you. Now, going into any challenging conversation, it's natural to focus on ourselves and our feelings. Maybe your team member is behaving badly or underperforming, and as leaders, this can have us thinking negative thoughts. Things like, how dare they make me and the team look bad? My boss thinks I'm a bad leader because of this stupid person. So those sort of things might be running through your mind, and we may take this situation as a personal slight against us, that the other person is attacking us by being disobedient or disrespectful. But the reality is it's not all about you. In fact, if you're a thoughtful leader, there is probably very little of it that is about you. So let's take a look at an example. A newly promoted leader is having difficulties with one of their team members. They used to be colleagues, but now they manage the team. The team member is being disrespectful, talking back, and questioning the capability of the newly promoted leader in front of others. Now, this sounds like a challenging conversation that needs to be had. The leader in this case is frustrated. It's not nice being disrespected in front of the team, and the team member is being rude and unprofessional. Now, at first, the leader may feel like it's a personal attack on them, but let's have a think. What else might be at play here? Well, firstly, the team member may feel annoyed that they didn't get the promotion and the current leader did. They may also feel upset because they feel like they're not doing well in their career, and this is yet another backward step. Or perhaps they're having financial struggles and this promotion would have really helped. This might just be another knock on their already low confidence. So as you can see, there are lots of possibilities that don't involve the leader in this scenario. It's more about what's going on for the other person that may be bringing out this bad behavior. So what does this principle do for us? Well, if you can enter a challenging conversation knowing that it's not all about you, it can be quite powerful. Firstly, you're less likely to take things personally. There are so many other potential factors involved, and I'll put a link to the post I have on the iceberg model here where you can read more about this, and that will be in the show notes page as well. But secondly, you're less likely to demonize the other person. What the other person is feeling is probably quite natural, so you'll be less likely to be overly critical and go into attack mode. And thirdly, it helps us to get curious. I wonder what's going on for the other person, for them to act like this. So you can say something to yourself like, I wonder what's going on for the other person for them to act like this. And this leads us to the next principle. Number 2, which is make an effort to understand the other side. Now this one follows on nicely from the previous principle. In a challenging conversation, it's important to make an effort to understand what's going on for the other person instead of focusing on ourselves. Now the principle to remember is to understand the other side. Now in practice, this means asking questions, and these include things like open questions to find out more information and closed questions such as yes or no, true or false, black or white answers to confirm that you understand. You also want to be sitting and listening, so instead of trying to impose your solution or opinion on the conversation and win it, focus on their opinion instead. Now following this principle is useful because it signals that you are interested in what the other person has to say. Now they may feel unheard and undervalued, which may actually be a contributing factor behind the challenging conversation in the first place. Now, this also shows a lack of self-interest on your part, and self-interest is a big destroyer of trust, so the more we can minimize it, the better off we are. And there's a related article about why building trust is better than authority. I'll put that in the show notes page as well, and that was thoughtfulleader.com/249. And while you're at it, if you like this podcast or this particular episode, it'd be great if you could leave a positive review on your podcast app of choice. It helps me get the word out about Thoughtful Leader, and I really appreciate you doing that in advance, so thank you. So principle number 3 here is acknowledge emotions, but don't let them overtake the conversation. Now, one thing I hear often from leaders when it comes to challenging conversations is that they are impressed with people who can take the emotions out of the conversation. Now, I can see where they're coming from, but I don't think it's quite right, because we don't want to ignore emotions or suppress them. We don't want to only focus on facts and logic, because they don't tell the whole story, and often emotions are a strong driving force behind a person's behavior. So in this particular principle, I find it useful to acknowledge and speak about emotions without letting them overtake the conversation. So acknowledging them means speaking them out loud, saying what emotions are coming up for you and what might be coming up for the other person, and then testing your understanding by asking questions. Now, if you're faced with a leader who only focuses on results or cold hard facts and logic, it can seem quite impersonal. It can give the impression that you don't really care about what's going on for the other person. Now, it may feel uncomfortable, but acknowledging yours and others' emotions during the conversation may provide you with a perspective that you didn't quite expect. So just to sum up here, you'll never have the perfect challenging conversation. Someone will say something unexpected or unwelcome, and you'll need to adjust on the fly. And that's why I think that keeping some simple principles in mind is easier than engaging in detailed planning or memorizing the if-then possibilities in the moment. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't prepare, because I think preparation for a difficult conversation is a really important step, but hopefully these principles will help you navigate and adjust in the moment and provide you with a sense of confidence when you do engage in your next challenging conversation. So I'm interested in your thoughts on this one. What are some principles you think are useful for engaging in a challenging conversation successfully? Let me and all the other Thoughtful Leaders know in the comments on the show notes page. Once again, that is thoughtfulleader.com/249. I look forward to reading your comments on that show notes page. And if you like this episode, be sure to share it with your colleagues and friends if you find it useful. Thank you very much for listening to this episode, and I will be back in the next one.